Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning.
Looks like people are trickling in. We will get started in about a minute or two. Okay. I think we have just about everyone here. So just one more minute. Okay, we can kick things off. Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday. Is this meeting already being recorded?
I think Andre's recording.
Oh, okay.
So check it.
Great. Thanks, Andre. I got very confused for a minute there. Okay, so we will kick things off. It is 8:33, and I guess we will just dive right in. Is there anyone from the public to make any comments? Do we have anyone from the public? Any comments? Seeing none, we'll move right along to attendance. Rom? Bob?
Here.
Patrick?
Here.
Scott?
Here.
Michael? Ajit?
Here.
Lauren?
Here.
Jan?
Here.
Eileen? I think Eileen told me this morning she wasn't unavailable.
I'm here in her stead.
Okay.
Julie
great.
Basin. Yeah.
Hi, Julie. Fred?
Yep, I'm here.
Maura?
Here.
Paul?
Here.
And Susan?
Present.
Awesome. We have nearly everyone here. Great day. All right, so I wanted to start the meeting with some positive news. Not sure if you all saw the press release that came out of the governor's office, but there was a meeting with Janet Yellen at Yale, and one of our P20 win data requests, number 24, with Yale looking at pre-K outcomes, was highlighted as one of the opportunities we have for research partnership. And so we are definitely getting a higher profile, especially as we get more data requests. I don't know if anybody else wants to make a comment about the Yale meeting or research partnerships. All right, seeing none.
I'm going to add something, Katie.
Okay.
So I thought it was great to see that it's the Treasury Secretary and that they're interested in the impact that childcare has on the economy, and so they, Yale has like a real interest in trying to understand the impact of childcare programs, and they chose to highlight this as part of the visit with the Treasury Secretary. Governor was there, and so it's a nice opportunity to highlight that this work is that is, in this case, several different agencies contributing to this is relevant for both research community and for informing policy discussions. It's an important question, the impact of childcare on individuals' ability to work, and so it's nice to see this being referenced in that context. We're not done, but they're excited for the results for it.
Thank you. So, with that said, especially as we get a higher profile, as has been discussed at prior meetings, we need clarity on our decision making. And so you'll see we have two items that we'll be voting on at the top of the agenda. So those two matters will require a motion and a second. The rest of the agenda will not be voted on. They're just for discussion. And so we can just move on to item 4, which is the approval of bylaws and voting procedures. So so thank you to Jan for your comments. Those were very helpful. And so we sent out an updated bylaws draft this morning reflecting those changes. And so that amended language is what we will be voting on today. So before discussion, so that we can have discussion, is there a motion? Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Was that Ram?
Yes.
And do we have a second?
Bob will second.
Excellent. Okay, is there any discussion?
Yes.
Okay, go for it.
So I don't know Robert's rules, so you'll have to correct me if I'm not doing this formally enough. Thanks for taking my comments and thanks for sending out some revisions this morning. I think that having bylaws is particularly important, especially since we're actually using them kind of right now to vote on something. We don't have an established process for, understanding what our decision-making process is. So this is to formalize it, and that's good. I do think that we need discussion on this point, though, and I don't know if everybody's had a chance to review the revised document that came out this morning before. I think you sent it out around before 8 o'clock. And I do think we need discussion. So there are some points that you clarified that really helped alleviate some of my concerns from yesterday. But I think some remaining items are simply, in terms of voting and taking action. What is our process? Are we voting? Like, does a majority or 2/3 majority of a vote then obligate all the other agencies to whatever the action is? I don't know how all the agencies feel about that. Like or if we need to have consensus, like are we, in terms of our decision-making process, is it going to be by consensus or is it going to be by vote? Or is there another option? I don't know if there is. And if it's, so I think that's like a thing we just need to decide. And then if it's a vote, then how many votes then are necessary for all the agencies to feel comfortable about that action, then applying to their own if they happen to be dissenting on a particular topic. I think that's something we should discuss. I think we should also discuss the section on conflict of interest. When I read that, and I hope I'm misinterpreting, I read it to say if a member or an agency has a dissenting opinion because of that, their vote could then be like they could not be able to participate in that vote. And so I'm kind of confused by that, and who would decide if somebody has a conflict of interest and how that would be determined. And then I also think we should talk about, in addition to whatever anybody else wants to talk about, the section on presumption of assent. Where is it? Procedures. So it reads right now, a member who is present at a meeting of the data governing board at which action is, let me start over. A member who is present at a meeting of the data governing board at which action on any business matters taken shall be presumed to have assented to the action taken, unless their dissent shall be entered in the minutes of the meeting. So when I read this, I'm thinking, well, if I'm in the room and I needed to give more thought, or I need to have somebody else in my agency, legal, security, or just others for advice, advise me on it. I'm not really quite sure how I feel about it. Just by being present in the meeting, I'm assenting. That to me feels uncomfortable. And not something that all of us would really like, because I think we're pressured for time. Like, I don't know if everybody had a chance to read this. Are they just going to, are they assenting to everything in here because they didn't have the opportunity to really think about it or speak up? So those are three things I really think we should talk about, and I appreciate the opportunity to raise those points for discussion.
If I can just comment on the section 2 with regards to the conflict of interest, I think, each one of us is responsible to be able to disclose if there is a conflict of interest, and in those instances that they would recuse themselves, as I read this, from voting.
And a conflict of interest is not the same as a dissenting opinion.
That is correct.
Those are two completely different things. A conflict of interest would be, if we're voting on something, a particular project or something, I don't know what it would be, but in which I'm the lead, right? I really should not necessarily take a vote on that because I have a vested interest in the outcome, right? So very different than I completely disagree with all of your points, Jan, which is not true.
That does help clarify
Yeah.
in my understanding of that. And maybe that does help clarify. Maybe some additional language and example being entered might be useful in that section, what that might mean. So to clarify for people like me.
I'll just give a quick example of it too, and we can, I think maybe we'll write up the additional documentation for these two, so that folks kind of can navigate it in the future. Just for myself, my wife used to work for one of the participating agencies. It's no longer the case, but that would be a case where there's a conflict of interest. If you'd say like, oh, let's funnel resources to this agency, or let's, like not obligate them to do something. So it's if you have some, real or perceived benefit due to your own, personal interests, and like Rom's saying, it's on the individual to disclose that.
Scott.
And like today, I would abstain because I'm sitting in for Eileen, so I would feel the need to abstain from voting. She's been involved in the last few months.
And actually, that was one thing, the way I read it is, if you needed more time to think, I think that would be brought out, put in the minutes. And maybe I read between the lines and shouldn't have, but it just seems like that's a valid note to put in, that we need to talk about this, at the next meeting or something like that. That's the way I read it, but probably should be spelled out.
Which section are you referring to, Rob?
The one where if you're at the meeting, you assent.
And the procedures.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think we do need to have just another sentence in there that accounts for that situation where a member isn't sure which way to go and they need more time or something like that. And, that should be reflected in the minutes and circled back to at the next meeting or before, something along those lines.
Yeah, I think an automatic default assent is not a good thing. I'm not sure. I think maybe that whole section could just be, if we're going to take action, then we should take action based upon whether or not we're voting or not, or it's consensus or not, versus any sort of just being present means you agree. I think that it puts a burden on an individual to even have the time to be like, wait, because sometimes you don't know in the moment. If you're busy, do I need to think about this some more? I just feel like it should be an action versus a default agreement. Does anybody else think that?
I mean, the only thought that I'm looking at that is, let's say if there's something that's time sensitive that needs to be voted on, and for whatever reason we have sufficient enough votes, to take the action forward. The person doesn't necessarily have to, be automatically dissented on it or vote any which way. The person can just recuse themselves, from the vote and state that they just don't have sufficient enough time and or information in order to make a decision. That's an a fair way to be able to move forward, especially if there's a time sensitive scenario. I'm